We know that community colleges are facing unprecedented new challenges, as well as a seismic exodus of successful presidents. In fact, the American Association of Community Colleges recently reported that in the last 5 years, over 900 presidents have had transitions. And we know there's only 1,200 community colleges. So that's a lot of presidential transitions along with the challenges that we're facing. One of the other reasons for writing this book right now is we know that we have a new generation of presidents stepping into the role. And these are the Generation X presidents. And they are taking the helm, leading community colleges, but many times also feel like their voices aren't heard. So Dr. Garcia, you want to talk just a little bit about that particular element and why we started to write this book?
Well, we started this conversation. It actually happened about 2 years ago. We attended AACC, and there was 2 sessions in particular that really just created this discussion. The first session was about the leaders who have been in this field for many years, the seasoned leaders. They are the giants, as we call them in community colleges. And then there was a second session with Generation X. Now, what was interesting is that the folks who attended that second session, Generation X, they also attended that session of the Giants, which was just previous to their session. And they talked about, we listen to their stories and we value their stories and we learn from it, but they're talking of a story that's not familiar to us to this day. They talk about how there was so much funding available. They talk about how there was community colleges being created every week, and there was just so much just flourishing during their time. But when we look at our time now, that's not the case. So how do we connect with them? Sometimes their stories just seem so far. We're so disconnected from them. Could we talk about issues that are happening to us? Can we make it more relevant to us? So 2 years ago, when that discussion was emerging at the AACC conference, Dr. Ellis and I thought, this might be a good topic to pursue. Obviously, there's value in learning what the past did, but there's also a disconnect. And if there's a disconnect, let's dig a little bit deeper and let's interview some of the Generation X presidents.
Exactly. One of the things I remember hearing from the Generation X presidents while we were having that conversation as well, one, they felt like many times their voices weren't being heard, but also, they were talking about how they felt like that many times the way that they approached the presidency was different.
Some of the takeaways, first was intrusive mentoring. And we talk about intrusive advising for our students, creating a clear pathway, making sure that they know which steps to take, being involved to make sure that they're academically successful. But when we talk about intrusive advising, there was a thought of, what about intrusive mentoring? What if we did that to identify future presidents? And what would that look like? So the folks that we interviewed, they talked about their mentors. They just did not have one, but they had many mentors. And they talked about the significant role that that person played, or those folks played in their lives. And they said if it wasn't for those mentors, they would have never thought about being a community college president. And so they talked about what the difference was between just a regular mentor role and one that was very strategic, proactive, taking the mentorship to the next level. And so they talked about when this mentor approached them and said, one day when you become president, or have you thought about becoming president, or don't become a sociology instructor, you need to go and pursue the presidency. So that really startled them, and it created some mixed emotions, and rightfully so, because they weren't planning on that career pathway. And so that seed was planted and it was watered throughout their mentor role. And so they started thinking, is this right for me? Is this something I need to consider? Does this go along with what I value? Because I understand if I pursue the presidency, which I was never thinking about, but if I do pursue it, how is that going to change my life? How's that going to impact my family's life? And so there was transparency, clear communication between that mentor, that intrusive mentor, and the future president at that time. And so there was clear discussions that when you're president, it might be all consuming. I mean, conversations like that. But how do you balance life? How do you integrate your life into the presidency and not think in a way where something has to give and take or you have to sacrifice anything? But the next takeaway they talked about was paying it forward. So we have intrusive mentoring, but how do we tap those rock stars? And there's all these rock stars in the mid-level management, but how do we make sure that we create the path, again, going to the pathway, a clear pathway? How do we make sure that those folks who are rock stars are in the national crowd? How do we get those rock stars to become part of those national committees? How do we get those rock stars to be part of the discussion of succession planning?
You know, Linda, you were talking just a minute ago about the whole idea of the presidency is all consuming. I think one of the concerns when we first started writing this book was because of the many challenges and also the negative press that people were getting about how hard the role of the presidency is, people were deciding not to become a president. And so that intrusive mentoring became really critical. And we also found out that when you talk with the Gen X presidents, they don't talk about balance much. They really do talk about integration. They talk about integrating their families into the presidency. They talk about crafting a rewarding life. It is a very intentional process that they use to be impactful, not only for the presidency, but also impactful with their families. And how does that all work together? Because they're passionate about the community college, but they also know that family is really important, whatever definition of family that happens to be. And they also share that with their college community so that they fully believe that all of the people that are employed at their institutions need to have that same viewpoint and that same type of respect. I also found it interesting of how they're utilizing technology to integrate their life. I'll never forget one of the community college presidents we interviewed said, you know, I don't have to go to conferences anymore to network because I can network through social media. So I go to conferences basically for many times for substance or to present or to have something that's critical to my institution. But it's not just networking anymore. I can spend better time with my family and at home with my community and with my campus. So they're utilizing technology not just in ways we normally think of, but in ways to creatively address the new challenges and the new ways of being a leader that it means when you're a Generation X president.
Absolutely. And Dr. Ellis, you just reminded me of a story of someone we interviewed, and she said sometimes you just have a picnic in your office or you bring your family to the conference and you celebrate your kid's 5-year-old, I think he was 5.
Yeah, it was a 5-year-old son's birthday party,
right.
And it was a Board of Trustees Institute. So They had the party with the Board of Trustees.
That's right. Yeah.
So a good way to I mean, if you've got basketball games and baseball games at your institution, if you have musical performances, the whole family goes together, the children. And it was interesting that almost all of the people we interviewed had children under the age of 18. So
Absolutely.
They are really talking about something that they live and breathe every day. We interviewed these Generation X presidents. We've talked about the challenges facing community colleges. So what are some ways that we're encouraged? And I will start off by saying I am most encouraged by the new ways that Generation X presidents are thinking about the presidency. Many of us are familiar with Peter Drucker's statement that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And one of the people we interviewed said, why can't culture and strategy have breakfast together? I thought that was really critical. They're saying, you know, this whole idea that it takes 10 years to make systemic change, we don't have 10 years. We've got to do it at least in 5. we really have to make changes more quickly. How do you do that? They talked about you don't have necessarily standing committees anymore. Yes, there's a few with accreditation or with curriculum, but for the most part, we have task forces and we bring together cross-functional teams to address an issue, not a standing committee that just meets every Thursday just because they meet every Thursday. And so it's new ways of structuring organizations, it's new ways of a sense of urgency, it's new ways of utilizing technology, and it's a new way of thinking. And one of the things that I'll end with before I have you talk about this as well, is one of the Gen X presidents said, you know, we hear the saying, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? Gen X presidents want to know who drank the water.
Yes.
So what are some things that you're encouraged about?
Well, I was encouraged about their passion and commitment to students. And I think it really is summarized by the person who said it the best in all our interviews: the tassel is worth the hassle. Yeah. And many of the folks that we interviewed talked about reflecting on their journey of being a student. And because of knowing so much of what the challenges are, you know, what's involved in their journey, they wanted to make a greater impact. And they also felt that it was a calling to them. And because it was a calling, they just wanted to make a difference to the student. They wanted to make sure students progress, that because students come into our colleges and they're absolutely motivated and they're hopeful. But during that journey, from where they start to where they finish, and hopefully that they do finish, there's challenges occurring. And they think about, okay, how do we make sure that we continue the momentum of that student when they come to our college? We want to make sure that they continue to still be hopeful. And we want to make sure they can continue to aspire as they move forward. But they have a true commitment, and they can't see themselves doing anything else but that. And so I think just hearing their passion and their love for the student and making that difference, and not just making a difference to the student, but knowing that if I help the student, I'm also helping out their families as well. So it goes beyond that. We had a person who we interviewed who said, yes, I can make a difference in small ways when I was not the president, but now that I am president, I'm looking at different populations, you know, of helping students, not just in my classroom or not just being a director for a certain program, but now I'm impacting the whole community at my college. But I'm also involved in those national discussions, so I'm even providing broader impact beyond my college. So those two, passion and the commitment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was really encouraging to hear their openness, their transparency, their willingness to help others as they seek to develop their leadership as well. And I think hearing their voices and sharing their voices is really critical for the future success of community colleges. And I think it will also be helpful as all of us work to develop future leaders, of learning from them, so that our future leadership programs will build their competencies and skills into the future leaders for community colleges of the future.